Tonight in Tanya, we spoke about stretching, adding big time to try to simulate the struggles, the challenges, the warfare that's going on inside someone who knows so little, and yet by pulling on his core fear of God, core belief in God, overcomes and does the right anyway, even though the challenge is so great. And we'd like to give God that degree of struggle, that degree of pleasure, that degree of war. And we do so by adding enormously, which for us, adding enormously could mean, as we do what we're doing, focus, have intention, think, God, I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this because it's your will. Please share and subscribe. Dedicated Le'ilui Nishmas, Yosef ben Yaakov Couple, for an Aliyah ben Neshama. It's actually been so special. I think this is the third class in a row that we dedicated for someone. And it's like, wow, just think how our Torah study below helps us below and helps them above. So that's really, really, really beautiful. So special to be able to be part of that. And you, of course, are all how we're part of that because you are the class. So that's amazing. Thank you for all the yous that come on, no matter what else is going on, and that patiently waited. So we last week started chapter 30. And chapter 30 is the third strategy in how to remove this heart that doesn't seem to feel, this heart that seems stuck. And we, in the chapter 29, had two perspectives, both of which work. Obviously, the idea of really using one's mind and thinking those thoughts, deep thoughts, to break oneself emotionally, to break the grip evil has on your heart, to free your heart to feel. And the second strategy, a very emotional strategy of pouring anger on the evil. And through pouring anger on the evil, it shrivels and dies away because it's being fed by you. It's being fed by me. When I stop feeding, it goes. Of course, it's hard to not feed my evil because that's my natural status quo. I believe in it, I feed it, I support it, I vivify it. I'm a great supporter of my enemy, of my challenge. But when I'm really focused and really passionate and really angry at it, I remove its vitality, it's gone. My heart can feel and I can even perceive God. So the first strategy was really good for those intellectual people that can really think and impact themselves. The second was really great for people that are emotional and also has this awesome, awesome side benefit of just a general realization of the nothingness, of the insubstantiality of evil. All a mirage fueled by us. The third strategy that we began last week also has an amazingly beautiful side effect. And that is how we look at others, how it frees us and shuts down the courtrooms of our mind. Because in the third strategy, we are also, in a sense, all of them are trying to break the evil. And in the first and in the third, breaking the evil is to breaking ourselves. But here it comes from recognizing how potentially everyone else is serving God better than I am. Because I have no clue the place of someone else, the physical place and the spiritual place of someone else. I have no clue where they're holding, what they've been through, what they're challenged with. So when I look at someone else and my courtrooms open up, and I start saying how they're not doing this and not doing that, and why are they doing this and why are they doing that? They could be giving God more pleasure than I am. Because their physical locale, their childhood, their current challenges, their emotional challenges, their traumas, their spiritual challenges, I don't know what they're contending with. And based on what they're contending with is the degree of how much God has pleasure from their service. Which, of course, the Rebbe said doesn't mean there's any excuse for doing anything wrong, because we have to have enough fear of God to keep from wrong. But it does humble me when I can look at people and say, it's very possible you're giving God more pleasure than I am. And that's humbling. Here I am thinking I'm good, God-fearing, committed, dedicated. But am I really? Am I really giving God pleasure? How do I know? And are other people perhaps far better than I am? So the nice benefit from this is it really allows us to look at people with such a positive, kind, beneficent, non-judgmental eye, such a like, wow, how special are you? How special are the Jewish people? How special is everyone? Wow. So did anyone do any of this work over the week? Did anyone see it shift anything inside of them and how they looked at others when they were thinking about these ideas? I don't know if that's a no or if nobody's up to sharing right now, but hopefully you did. And if you didn't, hopefully you will, because this is the theme of the chapter. Okay. So looking inside, continuing, the last point was, as we said, even though we're saying the truth, that how do I know the pleasure someone else, anyone else is giving God? I have no way of knowing, and it could be so much pleasure because their challenge could be so very, very, very great. I have no way of knowing. But that doesn't give me any excuses for sin, meaning, and we said the reason why the Rebbe is really warning us on this is because if I'm in this space of like, yeah, everyone's so great, everyone's so wonderful. I mean, they're doing all these things wrong, but they're still great. They're still wonderful. They're challenged. They're stretching themselves. God appreciates their efforts. I could start taking all these messages to myself as well. I mean, why not? I also am challenged. I also am stretching. I also am struggling. So if I do a few or more than a few things wrong, I mean, God's getting a lot of pleasure from me. So the Rebbe says, no, the buck stops here. When we look at other people, we have two different eyes. We look with our right eye. You're amazing. You know so little. You're doing so much. You're contending with so many challenges. I don't even know your challenges. I'm sure you're contending with a lot. Inside, outside, possibly, perhaps. Everybody in the world seems to be. So, wow, everything you're doing gives God so much pleasure. That's how I look at others. How I look at myself is, even if I'm challenged, which I am, trust me, I'm very challenged. Even if I'm struggling, I'm tremendously struggling. But I have to have enough fear of God to stay in control. I might not be so sophisticated. I might not be so knowledgeable. I have to have a basic fear of God. And the basic fear of God has to keep me doing what God wants and not doing what he doesn't want. So continuing along this line, so we are exactly, if you look inside of Tanya, on the 18th of Adar 1 in a leap year, about 2, 4, 6, 8 lines from the top of page 76. V'hine be'emes, now in truth, shehi milchama gedola v'atzuma. This is a tremendous war. This is an intense war. This is a massive war. Lishbar hayetzer, to smash our evil inclination. Haboyer ke'esh lahava, that's burning like this flaming fire. If they pachad havaya, because of our fear of God. Ukemo nisayon mamash. It is truly, literally a test. So the Rebbe, now again, we're sort of in a sense directing this outward. At the same time, we're looking at ourselves. When someone is so challenged, when someone else is so challenged, we might notice failures. We don't see successes. We don't see all the time they do, even though it's so difficult. We don't realize that. We don't realize all the time they're holding back, even though it's so difficult. And similarly for ourselves, because we're also challenged. We also sometimes are so challenged. And yet we still have to stick with God, as we said, because of our basic fear of God. Meaning fear of God is the most simple of all relationships. Loving God is higher and more sophisticated. Fearing God is more foundational. It's foundational, and we all have it. It's natural, it's intuitive, it's instinctive. Every single one of us believes in God, and every single one of us fears God. So the Rebbe says, in the end of the day, if all else fails, if all your sophistication fails, or if you don't have any sophistication, if all your knowledge fails, you don't have any knowledge, revert to your fear of God, because we all have that. It's the most simple, basic, foundational, and strong power we have that can keep us in line with God no matter what's going on. Now, this is a message to that other person out there who's struggling and could be giving God so much pleasure. And this is a message for you as well. And the Rebbe says, for both of us, in either situation that we're talking about, what you're going through could be literally a test. The Hebrew word for that is nisayon. Now, what does it mean by saying, wow, this could literally be a test? This is literally like a test. The Rebbe is saying is, there are challenges. If you're normal, you're challenged. If you're not challenged, that's awesome. I don't know, you're higher than normal. But I'm challenged. Everyone I know is challenged. We're all challenged. But there are levels of challenges. Meaning, some challenges are difficult, but I can understand them and understand how to pass them. I have enough developed emotion for God. I have enough developed relationship with God. I have enough developed intellect and understanding of God that I can pass this test. In anything, meaning like, just for example, let's say a person has this burning desire to share some incredible information they just heard with someone. Whatever, you can fill in the window dressing. They know enough and understand enough to be able to hold themselves back. That doesn't mean it's easy, but their knowledge could hold themselves back. They could think, well, anything you say about another person, you're actually strengthening. So if I'm going to share this horrible scoop about this other person, I'm going to be strengthening that evil. I don't want to strengthen that evil. That would be scary. That would be dangerous. That would be horrible. Or any number of other things that they know about gossip and the evils of gossip and what happens when one gossips. They can think of the story of the woman cutting open a feather pillow and not being able to gather back the feathers. They can talk to themselves through this challenge. That means it's not a test. A test, nisayon, means it doesn't make sense. You do not have the ability to pass it. You don't have the intellect developed to pass it. You don't have the emotional strength to pass it. You don't have the relationship developed with God to pass it. That's a test. That's the definition of a test. Meaning you're just holding on to your most basic belief in God, trusting God, fear of God, blindly, as we would say, irrationally. And with that irrational belief, that irrational relationship, you pass somehow this test. And that's the secret of the survival of the Jewish people. Because we've been through a lot of things that make no sense. And we still are hanging on and close to God and loving him and having a relationship with him. And that's to the credit of generations of our ancestors, us in previous lifetimes, that stuck through the tests, which means stuck through the situations that made no sense, that nothing in their mind carried them through. But that sort of basic Jewish, you're God, and that's it. That's a test. So the Rebbe is saying, so that's a pretty extreme situation. And the Rebbe is saying, it's possible you find yourself in a test. It's possible this other person we're talking about, this mythical person, representative person, who doesn't have background, doesn't have learning, doesn't have a supportive environment, didn't have a great childhood. He doesn't have anything. Such a person may be every second of his life as a test. Maybe the only way he's surviving anything in his Judaism is test after test after test after test, drawing his most basic core reality as a Jew. And for us, it might be more rare because we do have thoughts in our mind that can carry us through and developed relationships that can carry us through. But we also sometimes are in a test. And that's what the Rebbe is saying. In those situations, it's just your most core, basic relationship, belief, trust, fear of God that you pull on. This makes no sense, God, but I'm sticking with you anyway. This makes no sense. I can't make sense of it. I can't fathom it. It's beyond my sense. But I didn't sign up thinking this was going to make sense anyway, right? You're God. Why should God make sense to me? So just clinging to that basic belief, trust, fear of God, we pass. And that's the most intense way we pull out of our soul such enormous power, which we then can utilize in our daily, more regular interactions and dealings with life to get closer and closer and grow in our service of God. And therefore, since this person is being tested constantly because he doesn't have a developed intellect, he doesn't have developed emotions, it's just his core Judaism that's maintaining him. Sarach kol adam, each person needs, according to what's his level, his place in serving God, lishkol v'livchom ba'atzmo, to evaluate himself. Im hu oved havaya be'erech u'bechinas b'chama atzuma kazu v'nisayim kazeh. Am I serving God to this degree of warfare? To this degree of test? Meaning, again, and there's again this sort of duality of looking at myself and looking at others. But now we're shifting it to look at others to then look back at myself. So I'm just envisioning, I don't have anybody specific in mind, the masses of humanity, the 8 billion out there that don't know of God, have no knowledge, have no background, have no experiential, nothing. But they still have a relationship. They still sometimes do the right and not the wrong, just from their core fear of God and belief in God. Think of the vast majority of the 15 million plus Jews in the world. Have no background, have no knowledge, so little, it's like nothing. And still, in many situations, they stick with God. Basic core belief, basic core fear of God. So I have to look and say, wow, all these Jews with that natural belief that they're just sticking with to overcome their challenges. Imagine the war they're fighting. Imagine the tests they're overcoming. I need to sort of try to serve God at least as well. I need to look at myself and say, can I create such a situation to sort of a little bit give God, like these masses of humanity and masses of the Jewish people are giving God? You know, when you see people sometimes that are ignorant and pure, ignorant and striving to do the right thing, ignorant and committed. Who knows what their struggles are? We all struggle, but they don't have the knowledge to fall back on, just that core relationship with God. So how can I, who I officially have some knowledge, you know, I've been learning Tanya for a while. So how do I simulate that type of experience? How can I do it? So what the Rebbe is going to say now is, you know how you do it? By pushing yourself harder than you maybe think you're capable of. It's a very interesting advice the Rebbe is giving, because it's not at all how we generally do things. Meaning, if you want more God in your life, or want more blessings in your life, or need God's help for something, so generally you're going to add a little to bring down God's blessings. Maybe add more than a little to bring down God's blessings. But here the Rebbe is saying, no, big time. You have to big time add. Because you're trying to simulate the challenge and struggles of these people that are struggling intently, enormously. But you have developed a relationship with God. So how can you possibly struggle anything like that? Only by demanding from yourself such an addition that it's such a big stretch that it's sort of a little bit like this type of fight inside. So the Rebbe says, so we're going to talk about adding in good. When you pray, b'kavana, with intention, lishpoch nafsho lifnei havaya, to pour out your soul before God, b'kol kocho mamish, literally with all your powers, ad mitzoi hanefesh, until you feel like your soul is being squeezed. You're squeezing so hard. L'ilachem im gufo, to battle with your body. V'nefesh habahamishabon, with your animal soul. Hamoinim hakavana, that try to block this intention. V'milchama atzuma, with an enormous battle. That's the point. We want intense battle. Ulevatsham, to smash them. Ulechatetam ka'afar, to crush them down like the dust. Koydem hatzvila, prior to praying. Shachars v'arvis, morning prayers, the evening prayers. Midei yom biyom, on a daily basis. V'gam b'shas hatzvila, and also during prayers. Liageya atzmo b'yigias nefesh v'yigias basar, to really, really push yourself, to really, really work physically, spiritually, as will be described at length later. Meaning, what the Rebbe is saying is, you want to give God pleasure like people that are struggling so hard? So you need to struggle so hard. So now the Rebbe is giving you some ideas how you can struggle really hard. Now, you can, of course, customize this and struggle in your own ways, meaning stretch yourself in your own ways. The Rebbe is giving some broad strokes examples of, meaning you could say, me, what could I do already? I mean, I serve God. What could I possibly do that could be such a stretch? I'm serving God. So the Rebbe is saying, fear not. There's always ways to add in serving God. Like, for example, in prayer, where the Rebbe here is describing, now again, this person prays. He says every word. He looks inside. He says every word out loud. So therefore, the Rebbe isn't telling him to do any of those things. He does all those things already. The Rebbe is saying, focus on intention, not the body of prayer, but the soul of prayer. And squeeze yourself to pray with such intention. The author of the Tanya, Admor Zaken Alter Rebbe Shirzano Liadi, they say about his Hasidim, his direct disciples, that they would pray with such intention, they would reach levels of prophecy in their prayers. They would reach such levels, like, so to speak, higher than the revelation of Elijah the prophet, higher than Gilui Eliyahu Navi, with the intensity of their prayers. So the Alter Rebbe would often speak to his followers about filling prayer with intent. So the Rebbe here is using this as a prime example of, well, you think you're so religious and so good and do everything right, so how could you possibly add? Where could you possibly, I mean, be a little better, okay. But where could you possibly simulate such a fight like this person who knows nothing and is so challenged is fighting? The Rebbe says, don't worry. In your prayers, you could do it. In your prayers, there's enough room to struggle. You pray every day, 3 times a day, say every word, look inside, say it all out loud. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Fear not. There's a lot more you can do. You can always add more in your prayers. So that's one area that we could think of in terms of how can I struggle like this? The coach, and whoever doesn't reach this trait, to fight, to struggle, to battle with his body, this type of battle, well, you didn't reach the battle, the struggles of that simple person who's struggling like that all day long. That person whose evil inclination is like this flaming fire inside of him. To crush that evil because of fear of God. So the Rebbe is saying, even though you're serving God and you're doing a good job, you're doing a great job. But if I'm not struggling like that, I'm not giving God the pleasure, perhaps, that this simple person is giving God. And that is A, crushing thought. B, a thought that has me look at other people with such a beneficent eye. And C, a thought that should stimulate me to push a lot harder, not just a little more, but a massive amount more to try to give God as much pleasure as everybody else is. When you're looking at this, the Rebbe here gave the idea of creating for yourself a spiritual challenge in prayer. And that spiritual challenge in prayer could force you to survive it, to work as hard as this very simple person. Can you envision a different type of spiritual challenge? Meaning, I'm trying to translate this into the vernacular in our world. And we don't have to do this specific spiritual challenge. The Alter Rebbe is going to give us a number of ideas, and they're ideas. There's not options like this or this or this. We just need to understand the general overarching principle. Stretch yourself, challenge yourself, demand from yourself so much beyond your abilities that you will be fighting akin to the fight of that person that has no knowledge and no ability to pass his struggles besides his basic Jewish core. Any ideas that anyone could share of types of challenges they could create for themselves to achieve the same goal?
Hi, it's Dottie. Hi.
Hi, Dottie.
So I'd like to. So I have this challenge that I came across somebody that I knew when I was 20 years old, and they are like incredibly not well, Jewish, but like breaking, like doing things that are like unbelievably not good. And like I'm trying to deal with it. It's just, and I'm trying to be like a good little chassid, to try to, get them into Yiddishkeit. But I cannot believe what they're doing, and it's blowing me away. It's making me ill. So how do I deal with somebody who is so damaged? How do I deal with that? And I'm trying to help them, but they're so damaged. It's like it blows my mind how damaged they are. How do I do that?
You're trying to, well, when you say damage, a lot of different versions of the word damage, but I think how we generally start is by giving a lot of love to the other person, which you're very, very good at. And I think with I did all that, and then I got very burnt out. You got burned.
I got burned out because, when I found out other stuff that was going on, I like, what? Oh my gosh, I know what I was dealing with.
So sometimes we are taking on too much, and sometimes we do need to step back and create boundaries and love, but love with boundaries, so we don't get hurt and burnt by the process. Sometimes we can't do more than, again, it depends. I don't obviously know zero about the situation, so it's hard to answer. But if you were giving and you were loving, and then you found out more and more, and you were like, whoa, I have to step back, maybe you do need to step back. The Rabbi Yat speaks it doesn't sound comparable, but in a situation where, let's say, you're very close to someone, you love them very much, but they're really starting to do a lot of wrong things, and there's a fear of you continuing that relationship, but at the same time, you really love this person and feel really bad for them. And the Rabbi Yat says, well, continue the love in your heart, say Tehillim for them, say Psalms, you give charity for them, but on the surface, don't have that relationship with them because you can't handle it. So you still care, you still love, you're saying the Tehillim, you're saying the prayers, you're giving the charity, you're trying to turn to God, to beseech God to help them. But sometimes, I'm not saying this is the case, of course, because I don't know the details, but I'm saying that sometimes we are in a situation where we can't directly help the other person because of whatever they're going through, whatever our relationship is with them. We can't always, but we can always turn to God. We can always add in prayers. We can always add in charity. Maybe. And sometimes also what we can do that I've advised people and they've seen miracles with is sometimes you could take on a mitzvah for the other person. Ideally, you could take on a mitzvah that has to do with their weakness. And you could tell God, I'm doing this extra beautification. I do this mitzvah, but I'm beautifying it, or whatever, whatever the situation is. Or till now I wasn't doing this, but I'm stretching myself and doing this for them. Please put all the merits in their bank account, not in mine. And it could really turn around a person because they have the power of a mitzvah. But as someone just said to me, maybe your challenge is to know the boundaries of to give, but to give with respect for your own boundaries. But sometimes that idea of the prayer, the charity, the doing the mitzvah are ways to help another person, give to another person without feeling you're hurting yourself or getting trampled in the process.
So you're saying you should stretch, but use boundaries when you're stretching yourself?
In this type of situation, yes. Because here the boundaries are to protect yourself. That's different than what the Rebbe is saying about stretching, where we don't have a fear of you getting harmed. It's just a big, huge, enormous stretch, but only in good. But what you're talking about in terms of other people and relationships and people that are doing wrong things, where the relationship could be very toxic or harmful to you, there could definitely be those boundaries around oneself and that protection, but still enormous stretching to help the other person. You could take on something very big to help the other person. So you're enormously stretching, but not in a way that opens yourself up to any negative energies.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other ideas how one could stretch besides in the realm of prayer? That would be a big challenge, a big stretch, a big battle that they could think of to achieve what the Rebbe is suggesting here.
I really think that adding anything that you're not accustomed to doing is a big stretch. Like the things that we do consistently on a daily basis, it becomes part of who we are. Like we really miss it if we don't have it. But adding anything that you aren't doing, for me anyway, is a giant stretch because it's just adding something that I'm not accustomed to. Sort of like the 101 time of doing something that's not part of your, I don't know.
Makes perfect sense. I totally hear what you're saying. The Rebbe is saying add big time, and you're saying anything that's not in my norm is big time. Meaning if you would take something you do anyway and do more of it, that might not be such a big stretch because you do it anyway, you're used to it. Okay, so I'll do it more. But you're saying, I don't do that. So doing that thing that I don't do could be so putting me out of my box that it could be such a big stretch. Like obviously for this isn't the example, but I'm just thinking for other people, who don't regularly go on Mitzvayim, to say, okay, once a week for an hour go on Mitzvayim could be like, that's a huge, huge stretch. But for someone who's not used to it, it's not in their routine. They don't know how to do it. They don't feel comfortable until they know how to do it and feel comfortable and feel so great and wonderful when they're doing it. That could be a huge stretch, even though someone else could say that's not a big deal. So I think that's a very true point. When we're doing something that we just don't do, whatever it is, we just don't do it. So it's a big mental stretch to overcome that, and especially to remember, and to, especially if it's something that sort of infiltrates a lot of details of your life, and to do it. Like even something somebody could say is, let's say people don't make blessings before they eat or after they eat. You say it's such a small thing to add. I mean, what's a blessing? It's a few seconds, a few words. But if you're not used to doing it, to remember all day long, because of course we eat all day long. So to remember all day long could be a very big stretch. It makes perfect sense. Anyone else? Any other ideas? Sarah, if you're talking, Sarah, for some reason it's very, very scratchy. Maybe try again. No.
I get a different mic. Is that any better?
It's like very hard to hear. Maybe try slowly, as clearly as you can. We'll try to listen.
So I a while back took on saying Asher Yatzar with more kavana, but I put up signs, not like so that close to the bathroom, and it helped to say it like looking at the sign, and I just felt I had some physical things going on that I had to intensify something. So I did that, but then after a while you slip back a little bit, and I say it, but I wanted to really say it mindfully. And there's a difference between doing things just to do them and to do it mindfully.
I totally hear you and agree. I'm gonna skip over what you just said in case everyone didn't follow. So Sarah says something that she had added, which initially was a big and meaningful jump, was saying the prayer we say after we use the bathroom, to say it and to say it mindfully. And she put up signs in proximity enough to the bathroom, not directly across, I guess, but proximity enough to be able to look at the prayer. So she's not just rattling it off by heart and sort of meaninglessly, but she's really looking and saying it mindfully. And maybe she did it for something specific. I would say in general, it's a good thing to do if you have any health related issues that you want an extra blessing in, because we're really in this prayer thanking God that our body's working. There perhaps it's more focused on the digestive system, but in general, it's a prayer thanking God that our body's working. So it's a great prayer to add in if we're looking for more health in our bodies. And again, she was saying not just to say it, but to say it like for real. And initially it really, what I understood, I'm giving over, sorry if I misunderstood, correct me. But I think what she was saying, which sort of resonated with me, is in the beginning, it really worked. And then like lately, it hasn't been as strong and it's hard to be as mindful. So being mindful, and I totally relate to what Sarah's doing, because I've seen that myself in things that when I take on something in the beginning and I'm really doing it and it's a stretch, I really feel the difference. I'm saying the difference in quality, something I do already, but I add quality. I remember for myself, something that made a huge difference to me, at least in the beginning, was I started pointing when I would pray, pointing inside to the words of prayer. Now I'm praying. I was praying before, I prayed after, hopefully looking inside, hopefully saying it out loud, hopefully having some intention, but obviously many days doing a really bad job of that. And I found those first few days when I was pointing, like, wow, It was so unbelievable. It's so added to my prayer. My prayers were so focused and intent and unbelievable. And then I think sort of like Sarah's saying about her experience, after a while, it sort of doesn't have the same impact. I still try to do it. I still point, and I still think it's a good thing to point. And I think it in general, obviously, is helping my prayers. It can't be totally mindless when you're pointing as well as saying all the words out loud. But yeah, sometimes you do something, it's like, wow, that was a big stretch. That was difficult. And that was so powerful. But then, and I think this goes back to what Firma was saying. So Firma said that anything that we're not used to, when we do it, it's a big stretch. And I agree with her. And therefore, since it's a big stretch, there's a big feedback. There's a big like, wow, which is, of course, the point. But then the catch is how God wired us is after a while, depending how difficult it is, how long it takes, but no matter what you're doing, eventually it becomes normal for you, which has an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage of normal is you change. This is now you. And that's beautiful. It didn't used to be you to say the blessing after you go to the bathroom. It didn't used to be you to point when you pray. It didn't used to be you to sit down before you make a blessing. It didn't used to be you to look inside when you make an after blessing. It didn't used to be you to give charity every morning. This is beautiful. You have changed. You have become a more naturally godly person. So every time something stops being a stretch and becomes you, that's amazing. But when it's no longer a stretch and it's more natural, you lose the advantage of the stretch. I'm assuming, who are we to know, but I'm assuming God sort of set up the system deliberately, because if, like taking Sarah's example, you are looking at that picture of the blessing when one leaves after having used the facilities, and you're saying it and you're focused and it's wow, you feel it. And for the rest of your life, it feels like that, you'll never have a need to add anything else, because your whole life, that will be that wow. So God said, I want you to, I really appreciate that, but we're not done. So to always make sure we're not done, that initial stretch is big, is difficult, gives us that wow, focuses us, makes us feel so connected. And after a while, it becomes us, it becomes natural. Advantage, we've changed. Issue, I need to find something else to stretch it. I need to find something else to vitalize me and make me feel the stretch, the wow of my relationship with God, which, as Firma was alluding to before, she said that's the concept, you know, as the Alter Rebbe teaches in Tanya, as it's based on the Talmud, of like going beyond yourself. 101. If you're used to 100, that's pretty perfect, but you're used to it. So go beyond what you're used to. However good you are, there's always a beyond. And the beyond might not seem such a big deal. But as Firma was saying, which is very true, since it's beyond, it is a big deal. And then we get that feeling of the stretch. And then it becomes natural. And then we need to find something else. So thank you for that, Sarah. Did I basically follow what you were saying?
Yes,
Great, great.
thank you.
Sure, beautiful insight. Anyone else have thoughts on this idea of how can we do something akin to what the Alter Rebbe is saying in Tanya with his example of that intense squeeze of the prayer? Okay, well, we definitely got a lot of good feedback here that hopefully translated this idea into the vernacular of our reality. Let's continue. Now, there I was going to give you another idea. That was in the realm of prayer. Now, continuing another prayer in speech concept, also when we make the blessing after eating bread or a meal of bread. And all blessings that we make before enjoying anything of God's world, the mitzvahs b'kavana, and all the commandments of God we do with intent. Because of course, the prayer concept, on one hand, it was words like the blessings before and after food and such things, but it's also, of course, very primarily because the person's praying already. The Rebbe didn't say pray or say every word out loud. That was all a given. It was intent. So any and truly everything we do when we serve God, we're supposed to do intentfully. Intent is the soul of our service. So you give charity, give it with intent. Anything you do, do it with intent. And the Lord says we don't even have to say, so to speak, but we are saying, so therefore we should mention it, that the intention of the commandment should be for God's sake. Meaning, when we're talking about intention, there's many different levels of intention. The most basic intention is, I'm doing this because it's God's will. That's the overarching intention in anything we do. You can go to synagogue because that's God's will. You can give charity because that's God's will. You can have a mezuzah on your door because that's God's will. Well, the charity and the synagogue and the prayer and the mezuzah all have their own specific intentions. That's true. But you might not know all of them. You might not be able to be focused on all of them. But you could always have this overarching intent in everything you do all day long to serve God. God, I'm doing this because this is your will. And that's why I'm doing it. If it wasn't your will, I wouldn't be putting boxes on my door and kissing them as I walk by. I wouldn't be taking all this time every day to pray and to study and to say Psalms. I wouldn't be giving all my money to charity, all this amount of money. I mean, I'm a nice person, but I'm not that nice, you know? Why am I doing any of this? Bottom line, because it's your will. Because it's your will. Because it's your will and I want to serve you. Because your will and I want to connect to you. Because it's your will. So that already, the Rebbe emphasizing this idea of intention is sort of showing us, as Sarah was saying when she was talking about saying the blessing after using the bathroom, that it seemed from what she was saying that the main focus was to add an intention. And as she said, and I strongly echo, and I'm sure we all do, it's far easier to get ourselves to do something than to do something with intention. Mechanical thing I can do. I can add it to my list and I can put a check on my chart and I can do it. But to feel, even this very simple feeling, this very simple awareness, God, I'm doing this because this is your will. I want to do your will. I want to serve you. I want to be one with you. I want your will to be manifest in this world. That's a huge addition without doing anything more, but investing your mind in everything you do. The Bible actually speaks about this idea, how every commandment, every time we serve God, to serve God completely, we should be using all dimensions, thought, speech, and deed. So obviously some actions, some things are very easy to use thought, speech, and deed. Always thought is intention, and some things are more naturally speech, and some things are more naturally deed. And if it's speech to add deed, and if it's deed to add speech, but that idea of thought, speech, and deed means you're completely investing self, a complete immersion of self in serving God, in whatever it is that we're doing to serve God. And very often we might have the action and the speech, but the mind is where we're not there. So that, for many of us, is a natural, no-brainer stretch of using your brain, of putting your mind into your service of God. And we could do that with everything we're already doing. We don't have to add in anything we're doing. We have to add in the quality of how we're doing it. And intention, as we discussed previously in Tanya, as we'll learn later in Tanya, is literally like the soul of the Tanya, the soul of the Tanya, that's what it is, but also the soul of your service of God. Or as the Rebbe is later going to speak at length, it's like the commandment is the bird and the intention is the wings. And without wings, a bird can't fly. Or it's the body and the intention is the soul. And a body without a soul is just body without visible life. For that, you need soul. So that's how important intention is. And when we add the intention, this is so much changing our service and such a challenge to us, which is exactly the idea. See, it's unusual because usually we don't want to do anything that creates stress. We don't want to push ourselves too hard. We're all probably pretty cautious with pushing ourselves too hard. The Rebbe is here saying, push yourself hard. Push yourself hard. Try to simulate that pleasure that some other people are giving God. Push yourself hard. And here you can push yourself without doing more, but completely transforming what you're doing by doing it with intent. I'm just gonna, I know it's a little, well, okay, it's a little bit late. I'll stop here. Sort of in the middle, but I will stop here. Does someone have something they would like to share? Something they would like to thank God for from this week that happened to them?
I do. I have something that is connected with what you're learning now. So it seems like it kind of ties together. So my son Benjamin had some, whatever his issue was, I'm not sure, but he made this, this decision to push himself and to do strength and different things he wasn't so careful with. And he, on the Rebbe's, different Rebbe's in Yemen, like, a few different things, but he definitely stretched himself, and he had this kavana, and then this intent. And then 2 days later, my son Yossi called my husband because he wanted a copy of our Rebbe letter for his daughter getting married and a copy of our ksuba, whatever, I don't know, whatever he wanted. So he was going through the files, and he came across 2 Rebbe dollars that had Binyamin's name on it, that all this time, like, he never saw before. Like, he'd given the kids the Rebbe dollars before that they had, but then he got these 2 Rebbe dollars that
Wow.
that had his name on it. So it was really this miraculous, like, the Rebbe's, giving
Response.
Response to his hachata. So it was really kind of neat. And because of that, he was very intent in trying to find, has a date on it. He wants to find a picture with him by the Rebbe. But as of yet, he wasn't successful, but he did find a picture of Sippy by the Rebbe. And for all these years, Sippy always wanted a picture by the Rebbe, and he found one. So that was also like an added bonus, I guess, of a little miracle, because there's so many pictures to find the right, that date, that time. It's pretty miraculous. Anyway, those are
Beautiful. It's not little. That's beautiful. It's such a beautiful story of showing how you're really stretching yourself, and there's really a response that says, thank you, I appreciate it. It's a beautiful story. Someone else have something they'd like to share, something they'd like to say thank you for?
Hi, it's Lisa.
Please.
I would like to thank God for some excellent medical test results today, and then also to thank God for the beauty of nature so that I could go down to the lake, stare out at the lake, shed all the angst and worry from having to take that test and finding out the results just by staring into the beauty of nature. So those 2 things.
Beautiful. I'm so glad, so grateful for you to have such good results.
Thank you.
Thank God. Anyone else? Well, I'd like to thank God. I mean, it's unfolding, and I'm assuming it's going to work. Is that I had for several months now this big thing on my head, what is going to be with my son this summer? And cut a very long story short, thank God tomorrow he's going to be starting camp. And I do have a camp that's taking him, and I have a full-time support for him in the camp, and it should all work out from his end and the camp's end and the para's end. But I'm very grateful to God for pulling this together for me, making this miracle that he can have a very good stretching, developmentally stretching in a positive way summer. I'm very grateful to God for his miracles, and everyone who is still needing such miracles should have them as well. So let us look in the portion that the Rebbe said a long time ago, 1991. 1991, this week's Torah portion. The Rebbe said, Shlach, 1991, spreading the well springs of the inner dimension of Torah outward until such an outward reach, like outward beyond outward that we can imagine, as has been renewed, especially in this generation and especially in this lower hemisphere, the Americas, the hemisphere where Torah was not given. This is this lower hemisphere of the world, North America, South America, is where the Rebbe Rayatz, the leader of the generation, the Moshe of the generation, the Moses of the generation, established his headquarters, his synagogue, his study hall, from which the well springs are spread literally to the entire world. And this has been happening for over 50 years. 50 in the Jewish spiritual sense is like forever. So through adding in the spreading of these wellspring that we've already done more than enough, the Rebbe said in 1991, more than enough, we should merit immediately to the time when the entire world will only be involved in knowledge of God. That the knowledge of God will so permeate the world, it will fill the world like the waters fill the ocean bed, the times of the redemption. So the Rebbe said in 1991, we've done a great job. We've done more than enough. And we should already see the complete revelation. And we, in 2022, should say a big, how much more so now? How much more so have we done and done and done? And as we discussed today in Tanya, in a fashion that's a test and a scion, because some situations might seem so ununderstandable, but we just keep doing for God and for the revelation of the redemption. So God should remove all these challenges, remove all these ununderstandable things that just have us doing when it makes no sense. We should see it all so clearly. It should all make such perfect sense, which it will with the complete revelation of Mashiach now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Amen. Amen. Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.